Daf in Masechet Zevachim, towards the end of the fifth parak is Nun Hey 55. He did the Mishnah yesterday, but I'm going to read the Mishnah again because it's a little hard to just start a Gemara without the Mishnah. So we're going to start from the Mishnah on the bottom of Nun Daled on the bed. You okay, Nava? You with me? Great. Says the Mishnah, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor. The next carbonot in our list of all carbonot are carbonot of the shlamim that are public carbonot. Shlamei Tzibor. There's only one example of a shlamim that's brought by a tzibor, not by an individual, and those are called the kifsei atzeret. Those are the kfasim, the lambs that are brought on Shavuot with the shtei halechem. So those kifsei zivchei tzalmei tzibor and ashamot, all the different carbonot asham. And what are the ashamot? Elen ashamot. These are the five. Asham gzelot, or six, I guess. Asham gzelot and asham for stealing something and then lying about it. You bring in asham. Asham mi'ilot. If you take something from a hektish, you bring in asham. Asham shifcha charufa. If a person sleeps with a shifcha, a slave who's already married to another slave, let's say, there's a lot of different cases there. Asham nazir, a person who's a nazir who becomes tameh unwittingly. So a nazir usually at the end of the nazir would bring three karbanot: an ola, a chatas, and a shlamim. None of these three. But if they become tameh, they bring in asham nazir. And Asham Mitzorah, and Mitzorah at the end of their being to have Tzorah, they bring in Asham. And the sixth one is Asham Taloi. Right? Asham Taloi is where you bring in Asham where you did a sin. Well, you're not sure. You might have done a sin that if you did it for sure, you'd be Chayv Karban Chatat. So all those cases are Asham. The Mishnah says, 4 lines from the bottom, Shchitatam B'tzafon. They all have to be shechted. They're Koche Kodashim, so they have to be shechted in the north of the Azara. Kibel Damam B'Kli Sharet B'tzafon. You have to accept the blood in a Kli Sharet in the north. Like the previous Mishnah, you need shtei matanot shein arba, so you put on the mizbeach twice at each corner, which turns out to be all 4 sides. Nothing about the yisod. Nechalim lifnim min haklaim, within the walls, as we've had earlier, the walls of the azara. The zichrei kahuna, to the males of the kahuna. V'chol ma'achal, in any way you want to cook it, meaning it doesn't have to just be tzli, liyom v'layla ad chatzot, for the day of the shechita, the following night up till midnight, and that is as we had with the similar with previous mishnayot. Ask the Gemara now on top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, Ninalan debayit tzafon. How do we know this? How do we know that a karban, the first karban of the Mishnah, the zivchei shalmei tzibor, need to be done in the north? The Tani Rabba bar Rav Chanan kamei de Rava. It says, "Vasitem sir izim echad lechatat," and this is the pasuk of the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor. You should do a seir izim echad for chatat, and this is on Shavuot, and it continues, and the shnei kvasim for the shlamim, right? So it's a hekesh of chatat to shlamim. Ma chatat b'tzafon of Shalmei Tzibor b'tzafon. Just like the chatat we know has to be shechted in the north, so too the Shalmei Tzibor have to be shechted in the north. Amalei Rava. Says Rava, did you learn daf all last 2 weeks? How do we know that a chatat needs to be done in the north? How do you know that a chatat needs to be done in the north? Me'ola. The Torah says to shecht an animal in the north by carbon ola. We learned out last week and the week before that a chatat is like an ola. But that's a hekesh. And davar alamad behekesh can be chozer malamed behekesh. How could, or you can add the word ain, but how could something that you only know from a hekesh, a chatat is only known from a hekesh from ola, how could that then teach you as the source for a shlamim? You can't do that. A davar lama behekesh cannot teach you another hekesh. Ella, it's a different source. Tani Rami Rav Mari Braid Rav Kahana. Rav Mari Braid Rav Kahana quoted another braita which goes to a different pasuk. When this is the pasuk, actually, we're talking about the chatzotrot, right? That you blow the trumpets. We say al olotechem when you bring your ola, v'al zivchei shalmechem, and when you bring your zvachim of shlamim. Now, Rashi points out this has to be referring to the shalmei tzibor, because when an individual walks up to the Beit HaMikdash with the carbon shlamim, you don't blow any trumpets, right? Trumpets were done for communal offerings, for zivchei tzibor. The only shlamim that's in the tzibor is the shlamim of Shavuot. So this pasuk must be referring to the zivchei shalmechem of the zivchei shalmei tzibor, and it's comparing it to an ola, ma ola, which is kachei kadashim. And ola is kachei kadashim. Rashi points out other halachot here. I'll skip them. Av zivchei shalmei tzibor kachei kadashim. Just like an ola is kodesh kadashim in the sense that it's puzzled to its full yom. That's the case Rashi brings. So to a shlamim, this specific shlamim would be treated that way. And furthermore, we are now around 10 lines from the top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph. Ma ola b'tzafon, av zivchei shalmei tzibor b'tzafon. So just like an ola has to be shechted in the north of the Azara, so too we have a hekesh to compare the zivchei shalmei tzibor of Atzeret, that they also have to be done in the north. So that's the proof. Says Gemara, okay, but earlier you quoted a pasuk which compared the chatas to the zivchei shalmei tzibor, and we wanted to first compare it to say, just like the chatat is done in the north, the shalmei tzibor done in the north, and we said you can't do that because the chatat is only known from an ola. Right? But says but you still compare the chatat to a shalmei tzibor. What's the point of that comparison? Ela hekesha kama l'mayata. What do you learn from the first hekesh of comparing a chatas to a chatat to a shalmei tzibor? It's telling you ki chatat, that in fact the shalmei tzibor is like a karban chatat. Ma chatat eino nechalt al zichrei kuhuna, av zivchei shalmei tzibor eino nechalt al zichrei kuhuna. So it's telling you that just like the karban chatat is only eaten by kohanim who are males, not their families, not their children, not their spouses, not their wives, so too the shalmei tzibor of Atzeret, you give the animal to the kohanim because it's a public animal, and only the male kohanim can eat it. The Torah never describes who eats the karban. So this is the source for who eats the karban. Amalei Abaye said, Abaye, that's a very nice comparison, but ihachi, if that's true, then you should say anytime the Torah compares an animal to a chatat, and we don't have a specific explanation, it's telling you that it's only eaten by the male kohanim. And let me give you an example. Ihachi, what about by el nazir, as nazir, right? The ayil that's brought by a nazir, just to clarify, not the asham that we mentioned in our Mishnah, right? So the asham is brought by a nazir if they become tameh, which you're not supposed to. The ayil of the nazir is the required karban at the end of your 30 days of nazirut. If you recall the pasuk, it's a very strange pasuk. It says that you would take the shizroa. What does zroa mean? Like the big bone. I don't know. We usually translate zroa as the thigh or something, right? Zroa is some part of the animal. So you would take the zroa. I mean, on the seder plate, we have the wing, right? Or the leg is the zroa. Either way, you would take the zroa. Maybe it's a leg from the animal, and you would
the shank bone.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Take the shank.
Come on. Pesach's not that far away.
This is from the aisle. And the Torah says you take the zroa and you boil it, your b'sheila, you cook it in a pot of water and you put the hair of the nazir in the flames, right? You use it to to make the flame. It says put the hair, what?
It's creepy.
Okay, but he's a nazir. So, or she. Right, so you take and you give that to the Kohen. So it says el Nazir, by the aisle of the Nazir. The it says Hashem. The Nazir at the end of their period, they bring a karban to Hashem. Keves ben shnatot tamim. All right, they bring a keves echad leolah v'kivsa achat bat shnatot tamimah lechatat. That's the second karban, and the third karban is ayal echad tamim l'shlamim. So here too, the Torah very clearly juxtaposes, my favorite word, shlamim to chatat. Right, which we just said by the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor of Atzeret is to tell you that only male Kohanim can eat it. So is that true also by the El Nazir, which of course is not true? The El Nazir is a private karban brought by a Nazir. You take it home and eat it yourself, right? Achanami nema the Hakesha Katuv Chatat. Should you say the same thing? The Torah compares it to a chatat to tell you ma chatat eno nechal al zichrei kuna, af El Nazir eno nechal al zichrei kuna? Question mark. Says Gemara, that's not a big question, Abaya. Obviously, you can't say that the El Nazir has to be eaten by the Kohanim. Hachi hashta. Hatam, over there by the El Nazir, Kivan Dichtiv, it says, V'lakach HaKohen et hazroa b'sheila min ha'ayil. The Kohen gets a specific part of the ayil called the shank bone, right? Michlal dekule balim achile. Clearly, the rest of the karban goes to the owners. So no one could have read the pasuk of the ayil of the Nazir and of the Nazir, yeah, and said, "Oh, this all goes to the Kohanim." The Torah specifically says, "Give this part to the Kohanim," and so clearly you give that part to the Kohanim, and the rest you take home with you. It says, "Well, no, that wasn't my question." Abaya says, "My question was, what about that part that you give to the Kohen, right? Because sometimes when you give things to the Kohanim, we're going to see in our next Mishnah, when you give parts to the Kohanim in general, the Kohen takes it home and eats it with his family." Right? It's like truma. You give it to the Kohen, he takes it home, and he does whatever his family, his servants, his children, they all eat it. Maybe the zroa b'sheila, the boiled shank bone of the ayil, has to be eaten only by male Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash. So maybe zroa b'sheila miya lo l'tachil zichrei kuna. You're right. That's an open question because it seems if you're following the logic that every time we compare a karban to chatat, that's what we learn. Maybe you should say that, and we never saw that anywhere else, and we don't think it's true, so we don't know. Or it says where it's not really a kasha, because maybe there's an answer. By dema, kadshe ikri, kadshe kadashim lo ikri, right? That the Torah, when it refers to the aisle of the Nazir, it calls it kachim, right? It doesn't use the word kadshe kadashim to tell you it's not like a chatat. So it's specifically telling you that. Ella then itkish. So why is it compared? Remember, why is a karban the shlamim of the aisle of the Nazir compared to the chatat? Amar Rava, or Ravina, some have, that's to tell you Shem Gilach halakha mishlashtam yatsa. That's telling you a very unrelated halakha that we had in Masechet Nazir, which is that although the Torah says that at the end of your Nazirut you bring 3 karbanot, an ola, a chatat, and a shlamim, and then at the end of it you're supposed to shave your hair, that in fact you don't need, if you do it after only one of the karbanot, you're also yotze, meaning they're not all makiv, and we learn that from this pasuk in Nazir. So that is an unrelated halacha, but that's why we have a hakish. Continues the next Mishnah of today at the first wide line of Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph. Finally, we're about to get to Kachim Kalim. What are Kachim Kalim? HaToda, a regular carbon Toda. Remember, a Toda is an offering that was brought as thanks to God for someone who was saved from an illness or from prison, from hostage, or from, or that's, we bench goma based on this, right? So you bench goma where you would bring a Toda, or which is a carbon shlamim, and you bring loaves of bread with it, so it's a carbon that's brought. And ayol nazir, which is the one we've just been discussing, the shlamim of the nazir. The shlamim of that. What's your question?
Didn't we compare to the ola, which is kachi kachin?
The el nazir.
Oh.
Not yet. The el nazir. All those 2 karbanot are kachim kalim. They are kachim kalim. They are not kachi kachim, and they are shchitatan b'chol makom ba'azara. You have to shech them in the Azara, but you shech them anywhere, north, south, west, east, anywhere you want in the Azara. Now they need, like the Ola and like the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor, they have 2 that are 4. They can be not just inside the walls of the Azara, but the whole city of Yerushalayim. L'chol adam, to any person who's tahor. B'chol ma'achal, you can cook it any way you want, roast it, boil it, any way you want. Liyom v'layla, for the day that you shechted and that night, ad chatzot. Okay? Hamuram mehem, now the parts that are uplifted from them, meaning the gifts that you give to the Kohen, which each carbon has their own gift. The Toda, for example, like all carbonot, you would give the chazeh and the shok. The chazeh and the shok are the breastbone, basically, and the neck, essentially, and the thigh, sorry. You give to the Kohen. And also for the Toda, because there's lechem, you give 1 out of every 10 loaves to the Kohen as well. So the things you give to the Kohen, those things, when we say, are hamuram mehem ki yotzei behem, meaning you treat it the same way, meaning you can only eat it within that same day and only within Yerushalayim. Ella shamuram ne'achal lekohanim, but the muram is eaten by the kohanim and the neshayim, luvneim, ulavdeim, and their sons and their wives and their servants. So it becomes a property of the kohen, but it still has kedusha of a karban, and the kohen can't save it for next week. It can only be eaten the same day and night as the karban. So that's the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan. It says the Braita, 4 lines from the wide lines. Et chazei hatnufa ve'et shok hatruma tochlu b'makom tahor. It says that when you give, remember, these are the parts of the shlamim, of the toda, that you give to the kohen. So the chazeh, the chest of the animal, the breast of the animal that you wave, hatnufa, and the shok and the thigh that's given as a truma, those have to be eaten b'makom tahor. Now, what does makom tahor mean? Amar Rabbi Nechemya, says Rabbi Nechemya, why are you coming and telling me you should eat this b'makom tahor? The earlier things, like the mincha, you ate that b'tamei, now we're going to come tell you, and now eat this b'tahor? It's a carbon. Obviously, you have to eat it b'tahara. Ella, what it means is that you can eat it in a place which is tahar, michlal shu tamei. It means that you can eat it in a place that's tahar, but also has tamei people. What does that mean? So just to remind everyone that in the Mishkan and in Yerushalayim, there were three segments. There was the portion of the Kohanim, which is the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. There was the Ezrat Leviim, right? Not Ezrat. There was the area of the Leviim, which is Machane Leviim. Sorry, that's the word we use. Which is where Aaron lived, right? And Moshe lived, and all the people around the Mishkan. And then there's the Machane Yisrael, right, where everyone else lived. And then outside of Machane Yisrael is outside of the Machane. And in Yerushalayim, the equivalent is that the Beit HaMikdash is the Machane Kuna. The whole Har HaBayit is the Machane Leviyah, and Yerushalayim is the Machane of Yisrael, and outside Yerushalayim is outside of that. If you recall, if a person becomes a Mitzora, so they get Tzarat, they have to go outside of all three Machanot, right? And they sit outside the camp like Miriam, right? And they have to be totally outside. If a person is Tameh, regular Tumah, we call Tumat Zav, then they are Tameh, they're allowed to be in the Machane Yisrael, right? The third category. They cannot go into the Machane Leviyah. If a person is Tameh Mate, because they touch a dead body, they're allowed to go into the Machane Leviyah, but they're not allowed to go into the Mikdash, into the Machane Kuhuna, right? And the proof of that is, of course, that Moshe said that he took the bones of Yosef with him, and we darshan imo b'mechitzato, that he get them in his house. So Moshe, maybe not his house, but in his area, in his same area, so you can have dead tumah, you can have tumah, including dead bones, or bones of a dead person, inside the Machane Leviyah. So says the Gemara now, the fact that we use a description of eating the karban of Todah, b'makom tahar, is telling you it's a place that could also be tameh, meaning a place where some people there are tameh and some people are tahar. What is that place? It says, where am I? Tamar mitumat mitzora. It's talking about a place where they are tameh, tahar mitumat mitzora, meaning no mitzora can go in that place. But tameh mitumat zav. I mean, you could be tameh, obviously not if you're eating the animal, but a person in that area could be tameh from tumat zav. And Ezezeh, Zeh Machane Yisrael. That is the third encampment of Machane Yisrael. Says Gemara, well, how do you know it means that one? Maybe it means the second one. Ema tahar mitumat zav v'tamei tumat mate. Right? Maybe it means a place where people have to be tahar from zav, but can be tamei from touching a dead body. Ve'ezezeh Zeh Machane Leviyah. And that's referring to the second layer of the encampment. So how do you know that you can eat the karban anywhere within the three levels? Maybe you have to eat it within the second level. Amar Abaye says Abaye because there's another pasuk. Amar Krak, because the pasuk says v'yachaltem ota b'makom kadosh. You eat it. This is referring to the mincha in a place that's kodesh. Ota b'makom kadosh v'lo acher b'makom kadosh. You eat it in a kodesh place, the mincha, but the rest of the karban you don't have to eat in a kodesh place. So the mincha has to be eaten in the holiest of places. The rest of it can be eaten not in the holiest of places. Where would you eat that? So says Abaya, what that would tell you is afken the Machane Leviyah, that you go out of the holiest place, which is the Machane Kuna, the Azara, and you can eat it in the one level out. So the first pasuk tells you, it's really the second pasuk, the first pasuk tells you that you don't have to eat it in the Makom Kadosh, you eat it one level out. The second pasuk comes to say you can eat it two levels out, right? So Hadar Ktiv Makom Tahar, it says the second pasuk of Makom Tahar to tell you after the Machane Yisrael. So basically, there's two psukim telling you don't have to eat it in the holiest of places. So you move from Machane Kuna to Machane Leviyah to Machane Yisrael. That's Abaya's proof. Rava says I have a whole different proof. It's the same psukim, but it's a different way to understand it. Because the way I would read the Torah is the following. It says, eat the karban mincha b'makom kadosh, ota b'makom kadosh, and I would darshan from there, v'lo acher b'makom kadosh. The rest of the karban, meaning the meat of the animal, does not have to be eaten in a holy place. What that tells me is you can go anywhere. Afkin legamri. You can go eat it in Tel Aviv, right? You can leave all the machanot and go outside. Hadar katav rachmana. Therefore, the Torah said, tochlu b'makom tahar. No, at a minimum, it has to be a place where it's tahar, meaning it's not all the way outside. Some people there are tahar. And what do you learn from there? Go in one level. So, Ayla lemachane Yisrael. Go back in to at least the Machane Yisrael. So from the first pasuk, I would have thought you can eat it anywhere. It comes along the Torah and says it has to be a place where only people who are tahar can go, meaning Mitzora can't go there. So therefore, it's Machane Yisrael. Ask the Gemara, but when it says go back in, maybe it's going back in two levels. Ema Ayla lemachane Leviyah. Well, you got to assume the minimum. Lechada ma'alinan l'tarji lo ma'alinan. When the Torah says go back in, and you can only assume it means go back in 1 degree, not go in 2 degrees. Ask the Gemara, Hachi, well, I don't understand the first part of your limit, Rafa. You said when the Torah said you can eat the mincha b'makom kadosh, but not the rest. That meant go 5 layers out. Maybe it just meant go 1 step out, right? You're saying when you go back in, it's only 1 at a time. Why when you go out is it not 1 at a time? When you're kicking him out and saying you don't have to be inside, how do you know to say leave all the sections? Maybe you can only leave 1 section. Ve'od, and further, if you recall, there's a whole nother pasuk not related to this at all, where it talks about not eating things that are kodesh in your own home. Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, all the things, masar degancha, etc. So clearly, if you're living in Tel Aviv or or Riverdale, you can't eat your kachim there. So how would you have read the first pasuk and said, oh, only the mincha you have to eat inside, everything else you can take home with you? Ella machverta kedabaya, Rav is wrong, and throw away Rava and go back to Abaya's limud. And basically what Abaya's limud was is that there's two psukim that say that the meat of this can be eaten in a questionable place. So one goes from the Machane Kuna to Machane Leviyah, and the second says even from Machane Leviyah to Machane Yisrael, but you have to be within the Machane Yisrael. So to eat this kachim kalim of the Toda, you have to be within Yerushalayim, in when you have a Beit HaMikdash, or within the Machane when you have a Mishkan. Okay, now we're up to the third Mishnah of today. It says the Mishnah, which is the last Mishnah, I think. Am I right? In this parak? No, there's one more. It says the Mishnah, Shlamim Kachim Kalim. Regular shlamim, remember, you bring a shlamim, you bring as a gift to Hashem, as karbanot, you take home most of the meat of the shlamim, you give some of it to the kohen, some of it you burn. Those are kachim kalim. And shchitatam b'chol makom b'azara, you can shech them anywhere you want in the azara. B'daman tu'un shnei matanot she'en arba, they also are placed on the mizbeach in two placements that turn into four, because you put it on two opposite corners, and you go to the two sides. V'nechalim b'chol ha'ir, they can be eaten in the entire city of Yerushalayim, if it's a Beit HaMikdash, or the whole city around the Mishkan. L'chol adam, any person can eat it, as long as they're tar. B'chol ma'achal, they can cook it any way they want, and you get shnei yamim v'layla echad. You get extra time here. You get 2 days and 1 night. So if you bring your shlamim on Sunday morning, you eat it all day Sunday, Sunday night, and all day Monday. You can't eat it on Tuesday. What about Monday night? We don't know. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. What about Monday night? But our Mishnah very clearly says no Monday night, right? You can only do it 2 days and 1 night, but the Gemara is going to discuss this soon. Continues the Mishnah, Hamuram mehem, that which is given as the gift to the Kohen from the Karban, Kiyotze bahem, is like them. El shemuram nechal kohanim l'neshayim livneim avdehem. The parts that are muram, that are given, have to be in Yerushalayim for 2 days and 1 night, but they're eaten by the Kohanim and their families. The New Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, let's quote the Braita, which tells us the source of this halacha. Pasuk by Shlamim, there's actually 3 psukim, 3 parshiot of Shlamim, by different size animals, different types of animals, and it says the following, V'shachtu petach ohel moed. You shecht your Shlamim in front of the gate, the doorway of the ohel moed. Then a second pasuk by Shlamim says, V'shachat oto lifnei ohel moed. You shecht it in front of the ohel moed. And a third pasuk says, V'shachtu oto lifnei ohel moed, the same words again. So we have 3 verses that talk about where you shecht the karban shlamim. Says the Braita, that's telling you la'achshir et kol haruchot. It's telling you that you can shecht a shlamim in any direction, meaning north, south, west, east of the Azara, anywhere you want. Now, continues the Braita, the Girsi is a little confused, but let's just read what we have. B'kachim kalim, you would have kal v'chomer l'tzafon, right? By kachim kalim, like shlamim, you learn the north, that you're allowed to shech the animal in the north of the Azara from the kal v'chomer, from the kache kachim. What is that? Ma kache kachim shalachshur b'chol haruchot, kache kachim, which are not allowed to be shechted in any direction of the Beit HaMikdash, only the north, but huchsharu b'tzafon. Kachim kalim shechshur b'chol haruchot, and it's shechshur b'tzafon. So basically, we have 3 psukim. It tells us you can shecht it anywhere. The north we know from a kal v'chomer. We're going to unpack this whole Braita, don't worry. Says Rabbi Eliezer in the Braita, I disagree with that drasha. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo namar hakatuv al achshir tzafon. No, in fact, you need a pasuk to tell you that you can shech the karban shlamim in the north. There's no kal v'chomer. Why do you need a pasuk? Because you would have thought there's a kal v'chomer the opposite way. A halo dinu, not a kal v'chomer, but there's a limud. Halo dinu. It's a limud like a kal v'chomer. That ma kachim kalim shuchshu b'chol haruchot lo huchshar mikoman itzel kache kadashim. Just like kache kalim, which are really allowed to be done anywhere you want in the Beit HaMikdash, right? We'll see exactly. Again, we're going to unpack all of this. But it didn't specifically say they can be shechted in the place where the kache kadashim are shechted. So kache kadashim shalchshu ela b'tzafon. So kache kadashim, which are only allowed to be done in the north, as we learned last week, eino din shalchshar mikoman eitzel kache kalim. So maybe it's the case that you cannot over mix and match. Maybe the kache kalim can be done anywhere except for where the kache kachim are done. So the kache kachim is a high kedusha area. It's limited to the north is a high kedusha area. It's limited to the kache kachim. The rest of the space of the Azar is for kachim kalim. You might have said that. Talmud Omer, therefore the pasuk says lifnei ohel moed. he adds a lifnei, right? That you have to do it in front of the Ohel Moed, okay? Or he quotes Petach. Anyway, it says in front of the Ohel Moed. That's the end of the Brighton. Now let's read. It says the Gemara on the top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Bet. But my Kamifli, what exactly is going on in this Breita of the Tanakama, who says, oh, there's a Kal V'chomer for the north, and the opinion of Rebbe Eliezer, who says that there's no north, and you need a pasuk to tell you that you're allowed to do it in the north. What is the machloket? Says the Gemara at the top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Bet. Tanakama Savar. Listen, the Tanakama says there's 3 psukim that are written about shechting a shlamim in front of the Ohel Moed. Slata Kraik TV. It says 3 psukim that we quoted before. Chad legufei. 1 is needed for the essential halacha, diniboy petach Ohel Moed, that you have to shech the carbon in front of the door of the Ohel Moed. And what's the halacha of that? We're going to see in a minute. If the door is closed, you're not allowed to shech the carbon shlamim, right? If they haven't yet turned on the sign for the day and opened the gates, you're not allowed to shech. The carbon shlamim has to be shechted in front of an open door of the Beit HaMikdash or an open curtain of the Azara. And if it's not open, the carbon cannot be shechted. We're going to understand what open means in a second. That's one pasuk, that you have to shech the carbon shlamim in front of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that's one pasuk. V'chad nachshir tzadim. The other second pasuk is to tell you that the sides. Now, what do the sides mean? Meaning the sides of the door. The doorway is, let's say, 10 amot wide. I think it was 10 amot. Maybe it was 20. 10 or 20 amot wide. What about the rest of the azar? The azar is 130 amot wide. Okay, potentially. And what about on the sides? So on the sides, meaning you're supposed to shech the shlam in front of the doorway. Obviously, you might think from a simple pasuk, or one pasuk, that you have to be standing in front of the door. How about the sides of the door? That's why you need a second pasuk. So the second pasuk is telling you that stadim. V'chad, but the third pasuk is there to tell you that the sidei stadim, the sides of the sides, meaning once you get to the wall of the azara, they have offices, right? They call them lishkaot. And in the offices, the inside might be kodesh, but they're outside of the space of the azara. And so there, chad the psul sidei stadim. So you cannot shecht an animal in the sides of the sides, meaning the areas of the lishkaot, that even if they're kodesh, they're not open to the front of the azara. So that's the 3 psukim. Now, what about the north? How do you know you can do it in the north? Says the Tanakhama, you don't need a pasuk for the north because it's kal v'chomer. Because it's a kal v'chomer from Kodesh Kodashim. And Rebbe Eliezer says, I disagree, because I think chad, one pasuk is the gufei. I agree with you. The first pasuk is there to tell you a shlamim has to be shechted in front of the door of the Ohel Moed. Diniboy petach Ohel Moed, the door's got to be open. V'chad lachshir tzafon. And the second is to tell you, oh, and you can also do it in the north, because remember, he had a kal v'chomer, that maybe you would have thought the north is only the space for kachei kadashim, but kachim kalam cannot encroach on that space. So you need a second pasuk to tell you that. And the third pasuk, chad nachshir stadim, the third pasuk is to include the sides, which are not in front of the doorway. So what you obviously don't have here is a pasuk to exclude the sides of the sides, right? The tzidei stadim lo itzchukra. He says you don't need sidei stadim, because why would you have thought it's okay? Torah says do it in front of the Ohel Moed. You have a pasuk that says include the whole azara, not just in front of the door. But why would you have thought you can do it out in Portugal? Okay, says the Gemara now. Why Maishna hacha dichtiv petach Ohel Moed? Well, there's not hacha here, doesn't make a lot of sense. But why in one pasuk does it say do the shlamim, in front of the doorway of the Ohel Moed? And in the other 2 psukim it says tichtiv lifnei Ohel Moed. Do it in front of the Ohel Moed. Why does it say petach and lifnei? Kemashman k'Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The pasuk is teaching you what Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel taught us. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, as Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, shlamim sheshachtan kodem sheyiftichu daltot ha'eichal psulim. If you shecht your shlamim in the courtyard before they open the doors of the heichal, you're very anxious, right? You're ready to get your shlamim done. You got to get the meat home to cook. You're starving. They haven't opened the doors yet of the heichal. Remember, just again, I don't know if everyone has a map. Rashi in the bottom left over here has a beautiful stick figure for us. But right, remember that the when you walked into the what we call the Ezrat Yisrael, is sort of the first name we give it. You walked into the gate. You were in the first section, right? And then, of course, as you go further, you get to the Ezrat Kohanim, we call, and then you get to the Mizbeach, and then you get into the Ulam, which is the hallway, and then the Heichal, which has the menorah and the Mizbeach, and the Shulchan, and then the Kodesh Kodashim, right? But if you're in that courtyard in front of the whole Azar, right? You're in the courtyard, and you shecht your karban, but they haven't yet opened the doors of the ulam, then your carbon is pasul, right? And why is that? Because the pasuk says you have to do it petach ohel moed, which means it has to be open. Petach means literally the opening. The opening has to be there. What's going on? Shlamim sheshachtan kodem sheyifchatu daltot heichal. A shlamim that was shechted before they opened the doors of the heichal psulim. Shenemar v'shachtu petach ohel moed b'zman shu patuach v'lo b'zman shu na'ul. When the door is open and not when the door is sealed. It's Barnami, and there's another saying of this. Amar Mar Ukva Bar Chama, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, said Mar Ukva Bar Chama, named Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, Shlamim sheshachtan kodem sheyiftichu daltot heichal. If you shecht the shlamim before they open the doorway of the heichal, psulim. Shenemar v'shachtu petach ohel moed, b'zman shepetach heichal patuach, v'lo b'zman shu na'ul. That is the second statement. The third version of this, which is all the same, b'marava matni hachi, in the west, where's the west, Nava? Eretz Yisrael, right, as opposed to the east, which is Bavel, they taught it the following way. Amar Rav Yaakov Bar Achra, Amar Rav Ashi, Shlamim sheshachtan kodem sheyiftichu daltot heichal psulim. Okay, and they added in Eretz Yisrael, ubemishkan, in the Mishkan, if you shecht your shlamim, kodem sheyamidu leviyim et mishkan. Right? If you checked it before they picked up the Mishkan, remember the Mishkan was portable, right? So you would you make camp, you would set up your areas, you might set up the Azara. The Azara, remember, which you recall, was surrounded by these big pillars, right? But then they would build the middle, and if they happen to. If you shefted your animal in the courtyard before they built the middle, there's no carbon, because that's in front of the door. Right? Now, says the Gemara Pshita, it's obvious to us that if mugaf, if the door is closed, Rashi says that means that it's closed but not sealed, meaning not locked. They had a key in the door. So if the doorway is closed but you didn't lock it, that's kina uldami. That's considered to like it's closed because the whole point is that it's supposed to be open. You're supposed to be able to see inside. But what about vilon mai? What if they stuck a curtain there, right? A curtain meaning a curtain that's see-through, that's done for sort of just beauty or a little privacy. Right? So is that considered to be a blockage of the opening? Says Rabbi Zera, no, not a problem. That's considered to be like an open door. So you have, if the doorway is closed, it's one thing. If there's like a screen door, it's not a problem. I'm not sure if a screen door is the same as a vilon, but if it's like a vilon, it's not a problem.
What if it was a glass door?
Or I guess a glass. I don't know. It's a really good question. It's a really good question. Because in theory, the point is you got to see inside, right? That seems to be
right.
I'm not sure if a glass door would be okay, but let's keep going because I might be wrong about what I just said. Meaning the Gemara, that might not be true. That the point is
that's never happened.
No. Tosas asked the case. What if you make peepholes, right? What if you have like a door hole? Is that enough? Like Tosas says that probably wouldn't be enough. But anyways, let's keep going and we'll see where that comes up. Says the Gemara, what about gofha mai? Similar to James's question, what if there is a height in front of the door, right? Now, I'm not exactly sure. I have a hard time imagining how you can have a height in front of the door of the Beit HaMikdash, but like, let's say a tree fell, and there's a tree or a piece of wood blocking the doorway of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, how that would happen, I'm not quite sure, but there's a I don't know, they're doing construction, and there's a big piece of whatever.
One of the pillars fell down.
Or one of the pillars fell down. So the doorway is open, but the view, it's not so much the view, it's the access is obstructed. Miriam, do they translate it differently in there? Yeah, I have a hard time understanding exactly how a tree would fall in Beit HaMikdash, but let's just say. You're still muted.
Yeah, it says a mound or a block of wood.
Yeah, that's what Rashi says, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really explicit.
Anyways, but the point is that when we say you have to be in front of the doorway, it doesn't mean the door has to be open and you're standing in that space, or you literally have to be seeing the doorway or facing the doorway somehow. So says the Gemara, we have an answer from a fascinating halacha, which is a little bit complicated unless you either understand the picture in Rashi or have a mind for figures. So let's try it inside. Tashma, Titania. We have a braita, which we're going to quote tomorrow. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shnei pishpashin hayu bebeit hachalifot. There were two pishpashin. I don't no idea how to translate pishpashin, but they generally mean like openings, like I don't know what's the English word. Pishpashim are like offices almost. That's how we usually translate them. But like basically you open an opening in a wall, right? So crevices in a wall where someone might go in and hide or store some stuff, okay? So there were two pishpashim that were in the Beit HaChalifot.
Cubbies?
Cubbies, we can call them, but they were bigger than cubbies, but okay, but large cubbies. So now let's, if everyone has the picture in Rashi, I want to go through it. Again, it's not the most artistic picture, but it's helpful. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi has a picture starting on the Marav. If you stand, does everyone see Rashi in the bottom left? Hopefully everyone has the same picture in Rashi.
Yes, yes.
Sure, the article is a better picture, but let's go with Rashi's picture, which I don't know if Rashi wrote, right? So you have if you're standing on the Marav, just for orientation, you'd be standing at the Kotel Maravi, right? The Kotel Maravi is that western wall that is the top of Rashi, right? The top wall over there. So you're standing there. But usually, of course, you would enter the Beit HaMikdash from the other side. So now go to the bottom of the picture in Rashi, and imagine you're walking from the bottom of the page. You're coming in through the east, right? And you're going through a gate called Shar Niknar, which is a big gate, and you go into the Azara. You get into the Azara, and you're in a space that is large, and the space includes the Mizbeach. Rashi left out the Mizbeach here. When you get past the Mizbeach, you get to the Ulam. We translate the Ulam as the entryway, right? And the Ulam was a broad area, had a door, that's the Petach, right? And you would walk into the Ulam. The Ulam then gave into a smaller area called the Heichal. And the Heichal was the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim, right? So the smaller area here is called the Heichal. And then there's a Parochet, which is the line, and then the Kodesh HaKodeshim beyond that. Rashi reminds us, we had this a couple weeks ago, if you recall, that the Kohanim used to store you see where the Ulam, right? You see where the Ulam has space behind the Ulam, meaning where next to the Heichal, behind the Ulam, they would have cubbies there where they would store their knives and their instruments they used for shechting korbanot. And that.
So here it's translated as actually minor doorways.
Okay, doorways. We'll take doorways. But there was doorways where you could go inside. So the Beit HaChalifot, remember there were different, we discussed this before, I recall. One explanation of Beit HaChalifot was the chalaf is the word for knife, right? And the Beit HaChalifot was where they would put their knives. Others had Chalifot as being changing. That's where they would change. They would put their scrubs there or something, right? So that was the Beit HaChalifot. Now, says the Breita, now let's go back to the Breita and then we'll get back to the picture. Says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Shnei Pishpashin Hayu Beit HaChalifot. There were two doorways, as Miriam put it, two entryways that were carved into the Beit HaChalifot, the Govhan Shmona, and there was a height of 8 in front of them, and the point was, Kedei la'achshir et ha'azara kula la'achila, l'chilat kachei kadashim, u'l'shchitat kachim kal. We're going to say this is a mistake tomorrow, but for now, let's read it. That the problem is this. We think right now that in order to eat kachei kachim, which turns out is wrong, but in order to shecht kachim kalim, which turns out is right, you have to be in front of the door of the Beit HaMikdash. The problem is that if you look at the door at the picture in Rashi, the door of the Beit HaMikdash only goes in one direction, right? So you'd have to be standing on the eastern side, right? North and south of that, but you have to be in front or below the door in Rashi's picture in order to shecht the korban. What about all the space behind, right? You can't see the door. What about behind the door? So says the Breita, they added 2 additional doors, right? And there was one door on the right side and one door on the left side facing towards the west, right? So that if you're standing in the west, basically you have a doorway to the Beit HaMikdash. And if you're standing in the east, you have the normal doorway. So everywhere you stand, you have a doorway. Now there's 2 places that would still be a problem. One would be the sides, right? Where there's no doorway. And the other is behind the Kodesh Kodashim, which you can't see it, right?
Yeah.
But we'll get to those places. But initially we think that this is going to solve the problem of not having doorways. We don't know what it means that there were 8 amot in front of them. So we think what that means was, and that's why we're quoting this. Where am I inside? Where am I? My love. We think what it means is, Dika Kamayu Shmona, that there was something in front of these doorways that was 8 amot tall, and even though there was something in front of it, it still counted as a doorway. So it proves that you can have a beam in front of your doorway. And just want to know, it doesn't mean that. It means the Gavhu Ninu Shmona, that the height of these doorways was 8 amot. And so these doorways were 8 amot. Now, why didn't we say that initially? Because of the following Breita. Maybe there's a Breita that says, Kol HaSha'arim Shal Yusham, every gate in the Beit HaMikdash, Govhan Esrim Amah, was 20 amot tall, V'rachvan Esra Amah, was 10 wide. So how could you have a door that's 8? Well, these were not real doors. These were, as Miriam put it, minor doors. Pish Pashim Shani. These were a pish pish. These were sort of small doors, okay? So that answers our question. So just getting back to now the conceptual idea, You need to have a place where you shecht your karban or eat your karban. We think now that is in front of the door of the Beit Hamikdash. So if you're in the western, am I in the right place? The Mizrach, eastern. If you're in the eastern side of the Azara, you're always in front of the door, right? Because you're in front of the door. What about on the western side? What if you're behind or on the side of the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim? So there they had 2 extra doors, and the 2 doors were on the behind, on the back side, right, of the Ulam, and therefore 1 for each side. So they solved all the problems. Ask the Gemara, what about the sides? V'ha'ika Stadim. What about the fact that there are the sides, meaning to the right and the left of what Rashi calls the Ulam, where you can't see the doorways? No, of course, you'd make the doors in the corners. So the door would be, again, if you look at Rashi's picture of the Ulam, it would be in the top right and top left of those corners. So there would be a door going to the west, right? And a door going to the south and one going to the west and the north. So there'd be 1 door on each side. It would cover the whole Beit HaMikdash. What about behind the Kodesh HaKodashim? Va'ika Beit Kaporet. What about Achure Beit Kaporet Mai? What about behind the Kodesh HaKodashim where you can't see into any of the doors? What about there? So Tashma, in fact, there's another answer for that. Damar Rami Bar Rav Yehuda said, Rami Bar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Lul Katan Hayu Achure Beit Kaporet. In fact, they had a small opening behind the Kodesh HaKodashim. Just for this reason, Gavoa Shmona Amot, it was 8 amot tall, and the purpose of this was Kedei Lachshir Tazara Lachilat Kachei Kachim L'Shchitat Kachei Kalim. So that was there in order that the entire Azara, including that space behind the Kodesh Kodashim, would be useful for eating Kachei Kachim and for shechting Kachim Kalim. Because that was, obviously in the front section of the Beit HaMikdash, all the action was going on. They were shechting animals, they were doing the Ola, they were sprinkling on the Mizbeach. It smelled like burning flesh. People, Kohanim would walk to the back, sit down on the wall, and have a delicious lunch, right? So that was a place you can eat because they had a lul katan in that space. Behind the dichtiv, and this is the meaning of the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, which it says, it's giving a list in Divrei Hayamim of all the people watching the Beit HaMikdash, and it says, Shnayim leparbar. There were 2 for the parbar. What is parbar? My leparbar. Amar Rabbi bar of Shila, Kemadamar klape bar. It's as facing outwards. There were 2 for the outward-facing part, meaning the backside of the Beit HaMikdash, where you had a doorway as well. And so this answers the question for today, and we're going to stop here 2 lines in the bottom, that in fact, you had to shech the shlamim anywhere in the Azara, but there had to be in front of a door. What about the backside? There were more doors. So they had to add extra doors to the Ulam in order for there to be access to openings behind the Ulam, and they had to add a 3rd door or 4th door now behind the Kodesh HaKodashim in order for there to be access. So this is where Tosas asked a very interesting question, that what do you mean? What does it help you to have a door behind the Kodesh HaKodashim where you can see inside? All you're going to see is the curtain that's between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodashim, right? Because remember, there was a layer between those 2. And so how does it help you if there's a layer there and you can't see the Kodesh anyways? You can't see into the main part. So Tosas goes through a bunch of different possible answers. But one of the things he entertains is that maybe they made peepholes in between, which he doesn't like. But that's one of his answers. But maybe the curtain doesn't count, or maybe seeing the Kodesh Kodashim is enough, right? Because it's not clear the door has to be open to Petach Ohel Moed. What's the Ohel Moed? Is it the Kodesh Kodashim?
Just peeking into the Kodesh.
Right. Then the idea of peeking in is very interesting. So, anyways, but that is the halacha. We're going to stop here. We're not at the end of the sugya, just to be clear. So don't go home with the wrong conception, because it turns out that the statement that you can only eat Kachei Kodashim where you could see the Beit HaMikdash with the Ohel Moed is mistaken. But we're going to say that tomorrow. And tomorrow we will get more into the details about the areas of the Azara that were kosher for eating, the areas that were not kosher for eating, and things like that. And we will, God willing, pick it up tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. on Zoom. Shavua Tov.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Just like,